Hello, my name is Don McRae with Improving Enterprises, and this is just a quick example of the types of things we cover in our acceptance and test-driven development class. We're going to quickly follow a few steps here. We're going to take you through from beginning to end, writing a story down to defining acceptance criteria, writing unit tests, creating code, and then having those tests pass. And we will show how you might automate those as well with a tool like Cucumber in this case. So to begin, we've already moved along. This is sort of partway through our class, and what you'll see is we already have an application here. This is an airline, and at this airline, what they're trying to do is allow customers to register to be frequent flyers. So we have a one story already there, and we're going to create another one, but we'll just show you one that's already existing first. So this is the feature called Register Member. As a customer, I want to register for frequent flyer program so that I can start collecting miles for perks. And within that, we have a few scenarios. The first is our happy path, a valid registration. So a customer registers, he's got a username and an email, and there's no real preconditions to this. And then what we're going to try to test for is that the member does exist with that same username, that member has red status, and the way we're doing this is the status goes red to green to blue to gold. And he starts with 0 year-to-date miles, but then he also has 10,000 mile balance, which is a bonus we give all new registrations. So these are some business rules we've put in here, and we want to make sure that they pass. And then other scenarios, we don't allow for existing usernames. In this case, we have a precondition. Given a customer who registers with the username Bob, when a customer registers with username Bob, then we expect to see an error message, a duplicate username. And then we have another example where we have invalid email. And in this case, we want to be able to do a few tests with different types of invalid emails to make sure that in each case we get an error. So this is an example of some acceptance tests. This is automated, and we will be automating our own in a sec, but just to show, if you can run this, and what you'll end up with is a little kind of output of all the different tests, and at the end it just sort of gives you a summary. So there's 5 different scenarios, all of them pass. Within that there are 14 steps. A step is defined as each line in here. So this is a quick demonstration of one that already exists, but we're going to build our own sort of from scratch to sort of complete the whole cycle. So let's begin. We would like to now add the story where when a flyer actually takes a flight, that his miles are recognized and his status can be upgraded. So what we're going to do is take a look at a feature just like this one. So I'm just going to copy it and add it. But this one I'm going to call, and this is just a plain text file, this will be a feature called complete flight. Sounds good enough. So I'm just going to say complete a flight. If I open up that feature and start from scratch, we start these things with our story. So we have a feature, I'm going to call this complete flight. Quickly come up with a story as a member. When I complete a flight, as a member, I want my miles registered so that I can gain, or I guess accumulate points and gain status. So there's my story. Now, once you've created a story, what we've pretty much done is the first bit. If you go back to my little diagram here, we've captured value. And the next step is to define acceptance. Now I might leave this for a while like this until it comes time to getting closer to actually to implement this story. When we get closer to a sprint, we want to bring it in, we start to define acceptance criteria. Just like you might on a card, on the back of a card, for these stories in the product backlog. So what we're saying here is, why not just use it in plain text in a situation like this? So we're going to create a scenario here. The first scenario will be, I would like to accumulate miles. And I could even test a few things here. So I want to accumulate miles and earn status. That's my scenario. This is where we use the familiar given, when, then template. And in this particular case, I want to be able to reuse things that I've done in the past. So we want to be able to do this. I want to register somebody. I want to maybe start them out with a certain number of miles, and then have them take a flight that will maybe push them over the edge. Now, in our case, you start out as a red member, and we're going to move you to green, and that takes 25,000 miles. So what I would like to do is just sort of borrow one from a previous one like this. So given a customer registers, and I'll start this one the same way. So given a customer registers with username, let's say Bob, and an email, bob@improving.com, and I can also put in other preconditions as well, and I could say Bob has, let's say 20,000 miles already. When he completes flight, now we could do this, we have a lot of leeway here, and I could actually say when Bob, maybe. When Bob completes flight, I could just say a flight that has a certain number of miles. I really want to use the language of the business here. So if they've already got some test data and stuff, and we actually do have one, there's a flight that we have stored here, which is from Los Angeles to Sydney, Australia, which is almost 7,500 miles. And the flight is QF191. So given that this is some flight data, I can just put in that flight, so completes flight QF191, then what I expect is that he's going to earn those miles. So then I could say, and again, these are called steps. I want to be able to use some of the steps that I've used in the past. So we've already got a bunch that just measures their status when we did the registration piece. Where they started with red, they had 0 miles, 10,000 miles, when we just went over. So I'm going to just borrow this. So if I said something like, then that member has green status, which means he got upgraded, and that member has, now that he had 20,000 miles, we want to know how long that was. I think it was 7,490. So he should now have 27,490 year-to-date miles. So given that that particular flight is 7,490 miles. Now, given that he started with 10,000 miles for his balance, this is what he can spend on. I'm going to make this 37,490. So this is just test data. We'd be working hopefully very closely with business, customers, product owners. This is in plain English. So hopefully they're the ones that are going to be able to do this. We will work closely with them when we first create this. We'll get the data in there. We're trying to create a realistic scenario in a class like this. And eventually I would like them to just take this scenario and make all sorts of different scenarios. We'll do all the plumbing on the development side, and they're going to be able to try all kinds of different scenarios where we go from red to green, green to blue, right on the thresholds as well, all kinds of things that we can do in this case. Now, this is a test. This is just text, but what Cucumber does is by using this Gherkin syntax, it makes it very readable and easy to use, but then we also want to do is turn this into an automated system. So you can start that by doing just like I did before. I can run this as a Cucumber feature. Now we really haven't done any work yet, but what Cucumber does is it makes it very easy for us. It'll just recognize that we haven't done any plumbing. We haven't hooked this up. This is just some text we came up with. We haven't hooked it up. So it'll repeat the scenario, but then what it'll do is say, hey, we notice you don't have any plumbing behind the scenes. and it actually will provide you with the code. Now, all we've really done is added 2 new steps. The others we borrowed from previous ones, the registering of users and the checking of these members. So really what we're talking about are these 2 steps. Starting somebody out with a certain number of miles and then having them complete flights. And it recognizes that down here. So it provided us with some code. And now our job is fairly straightforward. We need to create a class and put that code in it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new Java class here. New class. This is sort of the code behind a step definition file for Java in Cucumber. And I'm going to add it to our features package, and this will just be called complete flights. It really doesn't matter what I call it, but I'm going to make it specific, and we have our own convention here. We call the previous one register member steps, so this will be complete flight steps. I'll create that. I'll put the code that they gave us right into it. Oops, didn't grab it. Let's copy that, and I'll dump it right into here. And it'll actually compile, and then it shows us these are the actual methods. So what it's doing is it recognizes that we were passing in some variables like Bob, or the username, and the number of miles, and that's what it sends into our methods right here. So we know that the first one was a username, and that the second one was just the number of miles we want to start them with. So this is the has miles test. This one was completing flights, also with a username, but this second one was a flight number. So we'll put that in there. Our job now is, and it defaults to just throwing an exception, but our job now is to connect to the API of our system. We have a controller facade class. We have the ability. We might be actually going to a remote system through a web service. However we need to do it, this is where we could do it. We're essentially replacing a UI and how it might do it, so that we can write these tests before we even create the UI. So we need to connect to our system. In our case, we have a system and called TDD, and I'll make an attribute for it here. It's called TDD Air application. This is our app, and we get access to it this way. We created a singleton just for the purposes of our tests here, so that we can get access to it. So when anyone, if anyone says that they have a certain number of miles, then our job is to give them those miles. And what we're going to do for that is make a dummy flight. It could really be from anything. So I'm just going to say from Dallas-Fort Worth to San Antonio. And the mileage will be the miles that they want us to start with. And the rest is just test information. I just call this test 200 if I want, but that's essentially the airline, the flight number. So what we're saying is, if somebody says they want to start a particular user with a certain number of miles, then what we're going to do is we're just going to create a flight that long and then have a member take that flight. So we have an API for that. So we're just going to say this particular member is going to take the flight test 200, because it's the airline plus the number of the flight, in here. So what we'll have now is, after this is called, we have a user that we registered will end up taking a flight that takes this however many miles they pass into here. So essentially what we're doing is we're just hooking up the API to the test, just like a UI would. And then anytime they write a test around completing flights, we're going to go back to our application and have them complete a flight based on the username passed in and the flight number passed in. So this one's pretty straightforward. So once again, just to connect the dots, when a given username registers, this is going to go to a previously created step file that we did over here that registers that member. When we want to just start them out with a certain number of miles, then what's going to happen is we are going to create a flight with that many miles and then tell the member to take that flight. Now they have those miles. And then finally, when that person completes that flight, so they pass in a username and a flight number, well, we're going to just tell them to take that flight. So this doesn't actually work yet. We haven't implemented anything. We just had an API. So I could run this, and what I expect to see are errors. So it says I have 6 steps, and most of them failed. So my scenario is failing right now. It's doing things like it's measuring green status. It wants that member to have green status, but actually it has red status because nothing's really working behind the scenes. They're not being upgraded. And so this is what I expect to see. This might be something we might do early on in a sprint or before we implement a particular story. And we have an objective now. And we could do a whole pile of different tests here as well, but this is what we work with the business. We kind of agree on what the acceptance criteria is. We have focus now, and then we get to work. So going back to our little guide here, what we've essentially done is we've captured the value in the story. So this is why somebody would want their flights to count towards their status. Secondly, we define acceptance criteria, and that's basically what we've done here. There's more to defining acceptance criteria, but this is essentially it. These are these scenarios. You can have failure scenarios and all sorts of other scenarios, flight not found, but this is just getting this one particular scenario done, where they go from red to green and then they accumulate miles. And now, the next step then is to create some unit tests. So on the side you'll see we've got some, we're automating, and Cucumber helps us with that. It's sort of, that was that little plumbing we did in the last step. But now our job is to make this work. So this is where people on the team will one by one start to make these things work, write a bunch of tests, make them slowly pass, but by the time that they've got them all working, then we can go back and make sure that these tests pass here from an acceptance testing perspective. So the rest becomes a bit more codey. It's not meant for the non-technical people to see like this one is, but the whole point is you sit with the non-technical people, sit with the programmers, sit with the technical people, they agree on something using this language. It would obviously take something with a bit more technical skills, possibly even a more technical QA person, to create something like what we just did here, but it's pretty simple. They just connect to an existing system in most cases. Now the next step is to write some unit tests. Now I've gone ahead and just gotten one a little bit started here, and we've created a unit test in a very behavior-driven way. So this one's called when a member completes a flight. And we haven't written any tests yet, but I did do a little bit of setup beforehand, so I don't bore you with this. But we create an application, we register a member, we go look up that member, and then we added a couple of test flights here, one that's 25,000 miles and one that's 12,000 miles. So the way now somebody who's implementing this would work is they're thinking, when a member completes flight, what do I want to test? So they create a test. And a convention that's popular in the behavior-driven development world is just to start your test with the word should. So when a member completes a flight, then should accumulate miles. Now I could get specific on year-to-date miles or balance miles or whatever the different types are, but I'm just going to do them in one test here. So should accumulate miles. I've done some legwork up here. So all I really need to do is have my particular member who I've created here complete, actually I would just do it this way. When I take my member Bob right here, I'll go to my application and tell them that they completed a flight. So Bob completes a particular flight. Now I'm just worried about accumulating miles, so I'm going to pick this flight right here, this 12,000 mile flight. So this is called, this flight is called Test 12,000. It's a 12,000 mile flight. When a member completes a 12,000 mile flight, then all I'm really doing here, I'm not worrying about status. This test is very focused on simply accumulating miles. So I want to make a few assertions here. I'm going to assert then that they have 12,000, this member has 12,000 year-to-date miles. What I've also mentioned earlier is that they have balance as well, and they started with a bonus. So this is going to be slightly different. They're going to have 22,000 balance miles. Now I've got a test written, but it fails. Now I'm using a plugin here called Infinitest, so it's actually running this all the time. It's the same as if I just went up here and said, run my tests. I already have a pile of tests from in my application that are all good. The only one that's currently failing is this one, should accumulate miles. And it's saying it's expecting 12,000 miles, but was 0. So this is where we have to get to work. Now, oftentimes somebody might be already thinking of the acceptance criteria they want to just create some placeholders, so they might go ahead and write a few other tests just to be sure. So I might say should accumulate miles. I'm going to also put one that says they should earn green status, which is the next status level in here. But I'm really not going to do much so I'm just going to make them fail because I'm only going to do one test at a time, and I only want to focus on one at a time. So another popular thing to do is to just use this ignore tag, where we're going to say we're going to ignore this test, but I just want it here because I want to remind myself of it. And I know I'm going to do it I want to see if I can earn green status. I want to see if I can earn the next level, which is blue status, and then finally I want to earn gold status, which is the highest level. But they're all ignored right now, which means if I run my tests again, you'll notice that it shows them, but it's only really running this one. So I can just focus on this, and then I'll one by one take the ignores off the others. So let's focus on getting this one to pass. So I can accumulate miles. I want to make sure that they do this. So I'm going to start by looking at what happens inside this complete flight method. I have a complete flight method. Let me just shut some things down here. And when I complete a flight, I get a username and flight number. Now somebody just put this to do in here, add miles and stats, but it doesn't actually do a thing. So let's make it work. Based on the username and flight number inside this class, I have access to a couple of DAOs for flights and members, so I need to go look them up. So with the username, I'm going to go look up a member, and I'm going to go to my members DAO, and then look at what it has, look up member by username. This allows me to get that username, and I'll do the exact same for that flight that I have. Flight equals flights dot get flight by the flight number that gets passed in. So now I found my flight number and my member, which I should have because my test added those in my setup. And then I want to be able to change it. So what I might be tempted to do here is just pull the mileage from the flight and add it to the member right here. But I'm also going to keep track of some of my design principles. I don't want this particular class doing all the work. I'd much rather just have member complete the flight. And just say, here's your flight, you do the work, like that. This method doesn't even exist, but I'm kind of working against an API that I would like to use, so I can lean on the tool to generate some of these things. Here it is in my member, and what I'm quickly going to do here is just say, take my year-to-date miles and append the mileage from the flight to it. And then back with my balance miles, I'll do something simple, and then append the mileage from that flight. Now, you'll notice that since I'm using a test runner, a continuous testing tool called Infinitest, right down here it went green the moment I did that. So and I'll show you if I ran it just the other way. Now I've got all my tests passing. I'm in a green state. So this should accumulate miles is now working. My test right here, both these assertions pass. This part is working fine. So you'll see now what we've done. We've essentially, we've captured the value. We've defined some acceptance criteria tests, which allows us to write some unit tests in a more focused way. We've already kind of understood the acceptance criteria. And now we've just developed some code, and the tests will pass. I could, at this point, keep an eye on go back and keep an eye on my actual acceptance test that maybe the business is running here, and I can just try running it again just to see what happens. And what you'll notice is now I have a few more that are passing. So it says Bob has 20,000 miles when Bob completes. The member has green status, but you'll notice down here these things are working just fine. That member has 2749. This is working fine, and it's not failing. It's still complaining about green and red. Just to make sure that that's working, I could take off this particular test for the status and try it again. And this should make it so that all of my tests pass. So now I've got 5 steps, 5 passed when this works. So I know that I'm making some progress. I can sort of measure the tests. So it gives you another metric during a sprint, how many tests are passing along the way. So I'm going to put this back. We're going to do the final step, which down here I've got the accumulate miles one. Now I'm just going to get it moving. I'm going to take the ignore off of this one, should earn green status, and I'm going to do another test where my member completes a flight that is, remember, we'll use Bob again here, completes a flight that's longer. It's a 25,000 mile test here, which should get him to green status, because that's the actual threshold right there. So I'll say completes the test 25,000 airline, complete flight, and now my test fails. You'll see the red down here. I can run my test again just to be sure. So I've got all these passing, just this one. The other one's still ignored. So if I do this big one, and actually I got to do an assert too. So assert equals, I want to make sure that when he takes this big one, his status is actually now green. So this would be member.get status. So his status I expect to be green. So this is the next thing we're doing. So we have the test 2500. This should be 25,000. My tests fail. And now we're back to here. I could even go ahead, since I already know what I'm doing here, I could copy the same stuff and do the other ones, right? I'm going to talk about blue status and talk about gold status, but except to get to blue I need to get to 50,000. So I'll just take this flight twice, and then for gold I'll take this flight 3 times. So that gets me 75,000, which is the threshold to earn, I'll put it in here, gold status, and this is for blue status. I'm still going to ignore them because I only want to pass one at a time. But now my focus is going to be just on this test. So I'd keep those ignored. So let's get him to green status if he takes this flight. So let's go into complete flight, go into the member. This is where the member does all his stuff. And essentially the easiest thing would be if his year-to-date miles is greater than or equal to 25,000 miles, then let's set his status to, well, not gold, green. That's the test. Right away, you see green. Speaking of green, it turned green. So my tests are passing. Once again, I'm showing you both. This is my little Infinitest runner, but if you didn't have that, you would just be going up here. Sorry, you go up here running your tests, all our tests, and now you see that I'm completely green all the way through. Now notice that I didn't worry about blue or green, I just passed one little thing at a time, and actually if I go back to my test here, I'm only dealing with green. So if I run this, all of them, run my cucumber feature, then now I have 6 steps, 6 passed, everything works. A member has green status, and I'm on my way. Now, ultimately, what I'd expect to see is the business at the same time are writing a lot more scenarios. I only have one going from one status to the next, so we don't have really any tests for anything else. I do have my unit tests, but I don't really have any acceptance tests for it yet. So I could see them doing another scenario to get to another status. So if we said something like accumulate miles earned status to blue or something, I could do the exact same things. I could start this guy off at maybe 45,000 miles, take the same flight. That should get him over 50, which would make him blue. But this seems like a lot of work. I'm repeating the exact same lines over and over and over again. I would do it probably, I can imagine a tester writing 20, 30 different types of tests, trying all the different scenarios of increasing status and miles and all that stuff. So it can be quite daunting to go in and do all that, and especially if you decide to change the wording and then you got to change it for everything else. So the nice thing about Cucumber is it gives us some other options. I don't want to have to repeat this every single time. I would much rather create a test that uses variables here. So for instance, if I create something called a scenario outline, then I could replace all the different variables, all the different values here with variables. So what we call these are examples, and it's a table structure. In this table structure, I will just walk through here and take everything that I want to be a variable and put it in here. So the first one would be username, right? I want a username, in this case Bob, but I might want to use somebody else later. Another one might be the start miles that they have. So how many miles do we want our guy to start with before the test? After that, I've got the flight number here, flight number. You'll notice I skipped email because email is not really relevant to this particular test, so I'm just going to hard code that email address in there. So I have my flight number, then I have my end status, which is green right now here, and then I have my end YTD miles, and then my end balance. This is a table because what we do now for every subsequent row, I would just fill in, what I want. So I have Bob that starts. We said we'd start him with 20,000 miles. Let's do that. His flight number we said was QF191. And his end status we said we'd want to be green. And YTD YTD miles is 27. So I'm just, you see what I'm doing. I'm just copying what I had up there because I want to be able to repeat this for lots of different types of scenarios. So 37490 is his end balance. So once I've got one of these, I should be able to just copy this and then do all sorts of different tests. So I might have Bob and Rob and Tob and Cobb, or Vob is good, and I can start them off in different ways. So this guy might have 45,000. He takes the same flight, but that should get him over the threshold to blue because ultimately he has, let's see, 45,000 plus this is 52,490. Again, this is test data, so we might need time to work this stuff out, but this is what we do when we test this stuff. I could do a similar one. This guy's at 70,000 miles. He takes the same flight, which gets him up to gold. And that is, so 70,000 plus that is 77, because I'm over the 75 threshold, so this is 10 more, and on and on and on. I just repeat my test here, but I have all these different tests. Now, since I haven't implemented blue or gold, because nobody's proven that I needed it, there was no acceptance criteria for it yet, but now there is. If I run this test, I will now see that for every implementation that we used, they're all right here. So this is the first one. This guy passes okay, right here, Bob. But then we go in here, and the next time we run it, one thing I forgot to do, sorry. The final thing I forgot to do is actually replace these things. So instead of using the word Bob now here, I'm going to say username. This, instead of miles, see I'm just taking what's down here, the names I gave them. This is start miles. And this is my flight number. Over here, again, is username. And again, right here is username. And then, I've just a few more here, so I'll do end YTD. Oh, wait, sorry, that was end status. And YTD miles, year-to-date miles, and finally end balance. So I've just replaced all of these with what's down here. And the hope is that this is still something that somebody who doesn't need technical skills or know how to code can still understand, right? Because we're just saying I want to be able to register a username and that has this many miles but all the data is right down here. And then they can just add and change and modify this without having to go into code at all. So once again, let me run this. And I don't expect it to run, but I want it to give me maybe some direction here. And then what you'll see is it shows all of them here. You've got Rob, who had started with 45,000. You've got Tob, who started with 70,000, and everything looks good up until here. But where it's saying, hey, he only ever got to green. He never made it to gold. This guy never made it to blue. He was green. So at the end, it gives me my overall steps where it's showing me that I have 18 that passed, but 2 of them failed. My 2 tests that I put in there that went to gold and went to blue. So once again, now I have acceptance criteria, actual requirements written in a test form. And so we'll call these executable requirements that we can be adding throughout the sprint, before a sprint, but they actually run. They can be run by the development team at any point. So the last step then is back on my test where I kind of realized I had these. I'm going to implement this. So remember I had should earn blue status. This will fail. Blue but not green because I haven't done anything for somebody who has 50,000 miles. So let's go do that real quick. In my complete flight, in member, this is where I was checking green status. Maybe now I want to check if YTD miles is greater than 50,000, then, okay, I'm going to do an else if here. Sorry. So if he's greater than 50,000, this is where I set my status to blue. Now, it still didn't pass. I'm writing, and this is where it could get quite complicated, algorithms, and they build on top of each other. But the thing is that because I'm writing my tests first, I run my tests, I've got them keeping me in check, and down here it's continuously running. This is something I thought would work just fine, but it's not working. And this is the type of thing that I might spend a long time trying to figure out. And if I have an expensive UI to start up and load, it might take me time to deploy the server, go on the website, get to a point where I can test this through a UI, just to realize I did something stupid, like maybe forget an equal sign here. That could be quite costly. But because I have these tests keeping me in check all the time, then I can just work and work and work until all of a sudden I hit on it and it turns green. So this is an example of, while you're doing things that are potentially dangerous, potentially, refactoring code, longer algorithms, more complicated things, I would like to just be able to keep going until I finally solve the problem. And then I can make it prettier later. But let's solve it, get our tests in place, a test harness, a safety net, and then we can start refactoring. And that's what I plan to do, because I'm not liking where this is going, but at least I'm able to solve the problem. So this passes, and I'm not going to touch gold until I actually create my test for it. So I'm going to take the ignore off this one. I'm going to rerun my tests. They should fail, and again, gold and blue, so it's all back to the same thing. It's at this point when I have a failing test, because I will never write code unless I have a failing test. I'm going to do the if-else up here for if YTD miles is greater than, I won't forget the equals this time, oops, 75,000 miles. That's when I'm going to do, that's what I'm going to make my status dot gold. Now we're green. We're green everywhere. So we've got all these tests. We've got the green, all run from my started with my acceptance criteria. If I go all the way back to my acceptance tests, I have all these different tests here. I can do anything I wanted to. If I started this guy at 10,000 miles and he took the same flight, that would not be enough. So maybe I'll make him stay with red. And at 10,000, so I'll just take, he's only got 17,000, and this is how much his balance miles are. I've got all these tests. I can do a run as cucumber feature, and this is what keeps me in check. I've got 24 steps now. All of them pass. All my scenarios pass. And this is sort of a quick, simple run-through of what it's like to do acceptance testing and test-driven development. These are the types of things we do in our training. And this is just one quick example, sort of halfway through the class that we work on to move forward. It shows examples of different types of scenarios. So from here, We did the code behind. This is the step definition file in Java. So that showed us what to do when those actual text files run, and it's using some regular expressions and then passing them in to us as variables that we can now attach to our application through the API of our application. At that point we left it. Even though these didn't pass, we didn't do anything else until we then built our unit tests. And our unit tests were a little bit more detailed. We were able to try all sorts of different things. They were testing out, individual classes. We're talking to individual classes. And then we went and got busy, did the work we needed to do that. Now we're in a position that if we ever wanted to refactor or do something else, sorry, that should be capital S. We have a bunch of tests in place. So it gives us more confidence in the code. I can decide that I don't like the fact that they're in here. I can maybe push them into another class. I can find more interesting ways of doing this. I don't like that I'm hard coding these things. I could go ahead and make all the changes I want to do with the confidence that I've got my tests to catch me if I fall, if I break anything up. And the more changes I feel comfortable making, then the better quality I'll have. The better quality I have, the easier it is to write tests. The more tests I have, the more confidence I have, the more changes I make, and then it creates this what we call a virtuous cycle all the way through. So that's an example. Hopefully it was beneficial, but this is essentially what we did. We created a user story. We wrote acceptance criteria. We could just do it on a piece of paper if you want, on the back of a card, but what that does is it leads us to create unit tests, and only then do we write code. This allows us to only write code for tests and not have extra tests, extra code, extra waste. And then we're virtually assured that these pass because we're only writing code for existing tests. Automation can then be added on top, and that's where Cucumber comes in. It takes our Gherkin style. If we write it in a specific way, it can then automate this and can be run and edited and updated by people other than the more technical programmers on the team. And then that should increase collaboration within the team. So that's it. I hope it was helpful. And again, my name is Don McGrail at Improving Enterprises. If you have any questions, you can look me up.